I think every new prosecutor needs to do a jail tour, needs to see what goes on there. Because once you're there and that door slams shut behind you and you see how people are being housed, it is life altering.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Defense Never Rests. I'm your host, Trisha Baxter. Joining me as co-host is Talar Hokulian Corsi. Talar, I'm digging your background.
You like it? Do you know?
Yeah.
Do you recognize it? Do you
Yes.
recognize the ladies in the picture?
So if you're just listening on audio, Talar has the background of her best-selling book, which I also happen to be a part of, hashtag Networked. And so proud of it. I love it. It looks great. So how are things in your world in Salt Lake City? What's going on over there?
Oh, it's a lot more quiet than it was before. You know, the inauguration and everything. I live downtown in Salt Lake City, so I'm in the middle of all the action, half a mile from the Capitol. So whenever there's anything going on, it's usually literally outside my doorstep. But things have quieted down. Like the most exciting thing right now for me in my life is Ralphie's Rules.
That's right. You have a children's book. Is it out
Yes,
yet? Is it
it
out yet?
is. It
Okay.
is out. It's available from the publisher. You can go to bit.ly/Ralphie's Rules to find it and order it. It'll be available on Amazon probably around March-ish. But I'm really excited about it, excited about the book and Ralphie and all the money that's going to be raised for the orphanages in Lebanon. I am working with our life coach, Olivia. She's working with me in terms of manifesting over 10,000 copies sold of Ralphie's Rules. So that's the excitement in my life right now. How about you? What's going on?
Oh God, I think things have calmed down a little bit too since the election. I had planned on taking my family to the inauguration, and then the events at the Capitol happened, and none of us felt comfortable going, so we backed out of that. But what an historic day to watch. First
Yeah.
female vice president, which is pretty amazing. No matter what you think politically, whether you like her or not, history in the making. I think there's very few moments in my life that I can say I witnessed history, like history that will be taught 200 years from now in history books. So I was just very, very excited for that day. I made sure my daughter and I watched it so she could understand and see a woman being sworn in. It's never something that I was raised on. I always saw men, I always saw white men until Obama, but I always saw white men in those positions. And to see not only a woman, but a woman of Asian descent, of African descent. I don't know all of them, but she is ethnically diverse, and to see that sworn into office is pretty cool. So, but besides that, we're living a pretty normal life, a pretty boring life, which I'm kind of coasting on right now. Boring is not bad. On today's episode, we sat down with Kristen Halkiotis, and what an amazing story. We really brought her on because I wanted to do a day in the life of a criminal attorney. We're both in the civil side, but I think what criminal attorneys do, a lot of it is similar in mindset. So I really wanted to talk to her and kind of do the episode, A Day in the Life of a Criminal Attorney. And she's fascinating. She really talks about her journey from DA, where she was prosecuting crimes, to opening up her own law firm, which is a journey in and of itself, and representing people charged with crimes and the differences of that. And we talk about her journey. She's climbing Mount Kilimanjaro in September of this year. She really is amazing, but overall her mindset, and it's so disciplined, it's so clear. I took so much away from it because I see so much of myself in her and my journey, where as I've gotten older, I've had a lot more clarity and discipline in my mind. So it was super awesome to talk to her. And I can't wait for you guys to listen to this episode. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring in Kristen. Well, welcome, Kristen. I'm so excited to have you. What is going on down in North Carolina?
Oh, just another Friday trying to avoid COVID and get some work done. But thank you all so much for having me today. I appreciate it.
Oh, I love it. I'm so excited to talk to you. And I said to you as we before we started filming, that You come across so well grounded to me, like you really know yourself. And we've only known each other through chats in a networking group, but that's the overall impression I've come from you, is just that confidence in who you are and what you believe in. So I was so excited to talk to you because I really want to dive deep into some mindset stuff. But before we do that, you decided about 6 months before COVID hit to open up your own law practice. So when COVID hit, and we'll talk about this, the challenges that you must have faced, I got to think were enormous. But I want to get a little bit more of your backstory. You were a assistant district attorney for 15 years before you started your own law firm. Let's talk about that a little bit. When you graduated from law school, what made you decide to go that path?
I knew I was going to be a prosecutor when I was in law school. And actually, I took a lot of ribbing from my law school classmates because I was the person who would show up to class every day in a suit because I was going to my internship at the DA's office after class got done. And I probably spent more time at the DA's office than I did like at school. But it was a great learning experience. So for 2.5 years during law school, and I attended North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina, but I interned in the DA's office in Orange County, and a town in that county that you may have heard of is Chapel Hill. It's not the county seat, but it's the most well-known city. That's where UNC Chapel Hill is located. So I interned in that office really for 2.5 years during law school, and interned for the elected DA and his assistants until I was able to get my third-year practice certification. So I spent like the second half of law school trying cases in misdemeanor cases in district court. So I always joke that's why I didn't go out for moot court in law school, because I was trying real cases in district court, learning a lot, working the kinks out, because I knew I wanted to be a prosecutor. And that way, when I started my career in the DA's office, I was ready to hit the ground running. So I kind of knew, and the internships that I availed myself of during law school set me up for it. And it was really all DA's office all the time. I even had an IOLTA grant one summer, but it was for working in the DA's office. So I kind of was doing everything I could to make that, pay off and work for me and give me dividends back down the road. And it did.
So what drew you to it then? Can you pinpoint, like, I can tell you when I went through law school, I had no idea. Well, no, I can't say that. I had some inkling of what I wanted to do. It didn't turn out to be what I ended up doing right out of law school. But you seem to have that passion right away. Where did that passion come from?
So I knew I wanted to be a prosecutor, and I can't go back to the specific day I knew that's what I wanted to do. I think it was maybe sometime in college, because I interned in college. I went to Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey, but every summer I'd come home. And one summer for a political science externship, I interned with judges in the same judicial district where I interned with the prosecutor's office. So I got to spend a lot of time in court with the judges I was shadowing, and I saw the prosecutors, met them. So I had that little bit I also knew them before I interned when I was in law school. As I started my internship in the DA's office, the elected DA there, Carl Fox, who just retired as a senior resident Superior Court judge in that district, he had such a profound impact on me as a mentor. And he said to me, Kristen, this job, obviously, we know that the special duty of a prosecutor is to seek justice. All other attorneys are zealous advocates for their clients, but the prosecutor is a minister of justice, and that is their ethical duty. And justice in different cases looks different. And a prosecutor is the only person whose signature releases someone, makes the charge go away, does justice in that sense. And the fact that you can help people that way too, in addition to seeking justice for victims, had such a profound effect on me. And so really the way that Carl sort of educated me about prosecution really informed every decision I made. He had a mantra that he also taught me when I was an intern. And his mantra is, there is a line beyond which I will not go to obtain a criminal conviction or keep my job. And that, I wrote it down on a piece of paper. Literally, I looked at it every single day for 15 years. And when you know where your line is and you know what you're not willing to do, it makes the job so much easier. And you realize that so much of what you're supposed to do as a prosecutor is to be looking out and to be helping people. You have to make sure that everybody's rights are protected, not just victims' rights. You also have to make sure defendants' rights are protected as well, that they have access to counsel if they're indigent and they need to apply for court-appointed lawyers, that they are, to protect the record in trials and make sure that their, defense counsel isn't doing something that's blatant reversible error. So just seeing that other side, which I think gets lost a lot of places. I think there are some elected prosecutors that don't really necessarily have that mindset. And I'm so lucky that I learned from somebody who was like that.
So I got to think that's incredibly difficult. Like, I have never been a lawyer in the criminal justice system. Like, I am all civil. So I have certain perspectives of what you do that are real, not real. I have no idea. But I got to think finding that line is incredibly different, that it moves constantly and that there's a certain mindset and doubt that goes along with it. What can you talk about that?
Sure. I don't think the line is necessarily that fluid. You know where the line is and you know when you're coming close to it. And, for me, I was never the kind of person that's going to come too close to that line. If I'm not convinced of something, how can I convince a jury of 12 people of it? And if I'm not convinced of something, I have to dismiss the charges or reduce them, find something appropriate to work with. Another duty of a prosecutor, Rule 3.8 of the Rules of Professional Conduct, if you don't have probable cause, it's unethical to proceed. If I'm not convinced even at that standard, if charges are thin, yeah, I'm not proceeding on it. And what I loved, so I was in the DA's office for 15 years, 3 of which were prosecuting misdemeanors in our district court. And then in North Carolina, felonies are prosecuted in Superior Court. And so the last 12 of those 15 years was spent in Superior Court. And I was really lucky to be able, for most of that time, over a decade, to be able to work with special victims units of different police departments and sheriff's agencies to prosecute a lot of like child sex cases, felony domestic violence. And I was able to be involved from the get-go, right? I'm the prosecutor. I got the call at 2 o'clock in the morning when there's this, incredibly injured baby that rolls up to the trauma center. The detectives are calling me. And I get to be kind of hands-on in the investigation from the very beginning. So I'm involved. I know what's going on. Everything's there. It passes muster. I'm able to get the evidence that I need to put together a good prosecution. And I'm able to have very good confidence in my cases. And certainly not everything is as specialized as that, right? There's a lot of stuff that gets charged where a DA is not involved from the get-go. And they're coming in, you're coming in after the fact, you pick up a file and you just kind of have to look at the police report and play with what you have. And it's not always ideal. So that can be difficult. And it involves being able to have those boundaries, to have the difficult conversations with law enforcement and say, you know what, this might not pass my smell test. And that can be difficult. And it can be especially difficult for somebody who's younger in prosecution, which is why I think it's so important that everyone is trained in a way that comports well with the rules of professional responsibility.
So, like, there's a lot of talk on the civil defense side these days about confirmation bias and as civil defense lawyers, when we're analyzing cases, to recognize our own biases and to see if you can remove them. I got to think, I mean, you're human, you got to have your own biases as well. How do you handle that? How do you remove the biases that you bring to a case so that you see objectively, you see justice and you administer justice?
I think, I'm looking for as much evidence as possible. Again, which is why I really enjoyed when I was able to run investigations like that with law enforcement on high level cases from the get-go, because I was able to say, all right, I don't want you, go ahead, take warrants out, but I want you to try to get a non-custodial statement first, because you never know what this guy is going to say. And you never know what they're going to say. Sometimes they'll just confess to the whole thing when law enforcement approaches them the right way to talk about it. But I think it's being able to look objectively at cases where the evidence is very, very thin. And I've learned that now on this side as a defense attorney. I can't think of anything that I necessarily might have done differently as a prosecutor, but um, my experience as a prosecutor definitely informs um, my work as a defense attorney and how I advise clients. Um, and some of the things that I see as a defense attorney, quite honestly, shock me in terms of some of the cases that the state is willing to proceed on. Um, Sometimes in situations where if I were the prosecutor handling the case, I wouldn't.
That's fascinating, and I do want to get into your switch because that's wow. I can't imagine switching from to a plaintiff's bar, like to be a plaintiff's attorney. Although I think it probably would benefit me to do so, like put that hat on and see what that feels like versus just thinking about what they're thinking. But I want to just follow back up and circle back up on something that you said because I have a friend that was a prosecutor in the juvenile system, and she would prosecute juvenile sex crimes, and it got really hard on her. It mentally drained her to a point where when she started having kids, she had to leave. Like just the question that what she saw, the situations she saw were just beyond comprehension, and the elements she had to meet and the questions she had to ask on the stand she would say some of it to me and my mind was blown by it. Did you have that same experience, and how did you deal with with not letting it get into your psyche?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There's a lot of vicarious trauma, a lot of vicarious trauma. And prosecutors don't always get the best training on that. A lot of the training that I did get from that came from the multidisciplinary team that I sat on, along with, DSS, law enforcement, Children's Advocacy Center representatives, forensic interviewers, people like that, where we would, because we would meet monthly to discuss all the new cases. Every agency would brief me, and then I would make charging decisions. We're going to charge so and so with these crimes. This is how I want you all to approach him. Go try to get an interview, things like that. But there is a lot of vicarious trauma. It's very, very real. And I think it's important to have extremely healthy outlets for it. Like I love my Peloton. I used to run marathons. I love, knitting, which is weird. I know I'm like 90. I enjoy reading and just playing with my dog and just things that are healthy outlets, and talking to people that I can talk to about this kind of stuff. Because it's hard and it can be isolating and it's very desensitizing too. And I totally get that. Like Law and Order SVU, that was literally my life for like 12 years. And I think it definitely, I don't have children, and I think that definitely helps. I think it would be a whole different ballgame if I did. But it's difficult, and I still do, even though I'm not a prosecutor anymore, I'm still like in that world, and I still feel desensitized much more than most average walking around people. Like the kinds of things that my colleagues and I, joke about, and the gallows humor and what you might hear walking down the hall in the DA's office when I worked there. I mean, if somebody just off the street walked in and heard some of the humor, they would probably think we were terrible people. But it is that gallows humor that you find a lot, with law enforcement, any occupation where you have people who are seeing horribly traumatic things and have to find some outlet for it.
Yeah, I would imagine that the joking is therapeutic. Like you have to kind of get it out, and you have to kind of be around the people that are also in that world, that are also feeling and seeing what you're doing, and you have that camaraderie, that it's a healthy outlet. That, like you said, somebody walking by who's not in that world might be appalled, but if you were in that, you absolutely need that. And I also give a lot of credit to you guys. Like I think you have to have a very strong why in your life, and a pursuit of a passion in that type of career to stay at it. Do you have that? What drives you? Let's just talk about your focus on when you were a prosecutor. What was driving you to keep doing those kind of cases, and what would get you up in the morning to handle that?
I think it was really just, I just loved it. I loved speaking up for people who needed to be spoken up for. Um, And it's funny because that hasn't really changed. You know, I might have switched sides of the courtroom, but that part hasn't changed at all. And if you think about it, there are many more similarities than there are differences. You know, there may be two sides, there's one constitution, right? The right to counsel, for example, that's a right of defendants that I've used to protect as a prosecutor, you know, by making sure people had access to apply for court appointed lawyers. And now, you know, I am people's right to counsel as a defense attorney. So it's really, it's honestly not necessarily that different. I'm speaking up for people who have no voice. Um, and it's such a huge responsibility, and it's really incredible. And you know, I went 15 years without representing a client really. And the first time I set foot in a courtroom actually representing a client, it just hit me that, you know, how powerful that moment was. And it's a feeling that I don't know if I would ever go back at this point, because it's such an incredibly wonderful feeling. But the transition was so much easier than I anticipated. I had no idea that it would be really such a seamless move. And it's something that's helpful in terms of marketing myself, quite honestly. When you have that kind of tenure in the DA's office and you switch sides, you know, when I meet with my clients, I can say, look, these are the next 10 moves that the state's going to make. And why do I know this? Because I used to do that. You know, if I think this is what the DA is going to hit you with next, or you better anticipate a habitual felon indictment coming down the pike next, I'm thinking that because that's the move I would have made if I were the prosecutor on your case. And it lends a credibility, like an instant credibility. And especially when I, you know, visited new clients who were in the jail, give them my background, and, you know, their jaw kind of drops and they're like, wow, you were a prosecutor for a really long time, so you really know what you're talking about. That's how, like, yes, I'd like to think so. um, but it gives them a sense of confidence too, I think. And of course, you know, I'm very clear with them. It doesn't mean I guarantee any results, obviously, because I used to work there, but it guarantees that I know exactly how the state's going to play this, because I was playing that hand for a really long time.
I think that's so true. I mean, it can also apply to what we do too. And I kind of
Yeah.
alluded to it before, which is, you know, in our profession, people switch sides a lot. I mean, you have defense attorneys who switch to plaintiffs and plaintiffs who switch to defendants. You have, you know, plaintiffs attorneys that become mediators, or claims adjusters that become lawyers, or vice versa. And every time there's a switch, you bring that experience with you. It's kind of, you know, being behind the curtain, if you will, seeing behind the curtain, and then you get to use what you saw behind the curtain to your advantage when you're in that other job. So, and I think that's such wonderful experience. I've been practicing for 23 years. I've been a civil defense lawyer for 23 years. I think at some point I would love to try like just a week in the shoes of a plaintiff's attorney, and just to get a sense of what they feel, because it would be so valuable to have that different perspective. You're now on my long-winded question. You're now on the defense side, representing people that have been charged with crimes. So, and just to kind of follow along with that, do you sense you get more credibility from the prosecutors because they know that you were one of them at one point?
I think what gives me a leg up is that because I worked with most all of them, they trust me and they know that I'm not there to get one over on them. And you know, most defense attorneys aren't there to get one over. But I mean, as we all know, in any area of law, I think there's the short list of people that you might not always trust. And so it is good that
No,
obviously
no,
they know
no.
there's no way I'm on that list. Um, but I think too, it's important, you know, to have that good rapport. And I tell my clients all the time, look, if we get into court and there's a situation where I need to jump up and down and yell and scream, I will 100% do that. But that's not where I start from. Like, I will always start from a position of mutual respect, of willingness to negotiate, to take a hard look at the evidence, and then go in on negotiations with the prosecutor, you know, to see what's the right result for this particular case. What can the state prove? What can't they prove? But I always tell clients, look, if you want somebody that's going to go in guns blazing and yelling at people from jump, that's not me. And you need to go hire a different lawyer. And I think people really respect that. And I tell them, look, you know, if lawyers who do that, they're just disadvantaging you, and they're disadvantaging all their future clients too. And you have to keep credibility, you have to keep respect. And certainly in this profession, things get heated sometimes. I'm fully aware of that. But you make sure that stuff happens in the courtroom, in a controlled environment, and you don't go around, acting like a jerk, because that never gets you far in the long run. And I think a lot of times, especially younger attorneys I've seen, might prioritize the short game a little too much, and not be thinking down the road where they need to be thinking.
Oh, I feel that too. I did that. I thought when I was younger, and I think as a couple with the fact that I was a woman, I thought I needed to just spit fire. Like I needed to just pounce on every issue, every argument. I was always right. And it took me a while to unlearn that. And now I'm very much in your camp. I think you get, what's the phrase? You get more bees with honey, or whatever that phrase
Mhm.
is. But
Yeah.
I love that. Did It sounds like you had that from the get-go. Like when you started practicing, that you were of that mindset of I'm going to approach this calmly and see if we can work together, because I know that I get more of what I want when we do that. Did you always have
Yeah.
that?
No, I think when I was a young baby prosecutor in district court, I think I was wound pretty tightly. I think I was wound pretty tight, but I was in my mid 20s. I'm 42 now, and if I, hopefully, yeah, hopefully I'd be calmed down a little bit by now, and realize some life lessons. But I see Talar's background with our network book, and I did talk about this some in my chapter in network. That I think what my whole entire career has taught me is that the things that are important, they're not the jobs we do, they're the relationships that we build. And building those relationships in a credible, respectful, kind fashion allowed me to make such a seamless transition, right? It wasn't just about, my clients, it's also about the relationships that I had established with judges, with other lawyers, with bailiffs, with courtroom clerks, with law enforcement, with the Child Advocacy Center, with every entity that's participating, DSS, every entity that participates in the court system, being able to have a credible, functional, good working, respectful relationship with them. Those relationships transfer. And I might be on the other side now, but I'm still dealing with these folks, these wonderful people, and that hasn't changed. And I'm still the same person. I just represent somebody else. That's all. And that was one of the reasons why I was so excited to go into defense work here, is because I did have those relationships, and they help me every single day. If I goof and I need a clerk to bring up a file for me, they're probably likely to. If I need the bailiff's help with something, they'll generally help me out pretty quickly. And the judges, they know that I am credible. They remember me when I was a prosecutor. I'm not somebody that they have to worry about. So it pays off royally.
So what made you decide to do the switch? 15 years in one profession on one side. That's got to be a hard change. What was the impediments for that switch?
So, I had going into defense work is something I had thought about. It had popped up in my mind every so often over the years. And I knew I had had so much autonomy in the DA's office really from the get-go, that I didn't want to go to a defense firm, where they were going to control what I did. If I stepped out, I was going to step out and be a boss. I didn't want to get bossed around. Um, but I was always scared because I knew the law, but I didn't know business. And that changed. I had the amazing, incredible opportunity to serve as volunteer president and CEO of the Junior League of Greensboro in the 2018-2019 year. And serving basically as CEO of an 800 member corporation, that brought me up to speed, and it gave me that training on the business side of things. And I was like, oh, QuickBooks isn't so complicated, and whatever is complicated, I can outsource and delegate. This shouldn't be something that keeps me from trying this, right? This could either be the best thing ever, it could be a colossal disaster, but I don't want to get to be 90 years old and wonder, like, what if I had done this? Like, would I have been capable of it? Could I have hung in there? Could I have done it well? And so it just, I was at 15 years, and it was a really good time. And I figured, now's as good a time as any. We had just come off losing one of our chief district court judge. He passed away like a few weeks really before I decided it's just time to go for this. Life is short. and I need to take a stab at this. And so that was my first day in private practice was October 1, 2019.
That's amazing. I think a lot of people have dreamt of switching in some way, shape, or form. And whether you were happy and you want to try something, just try something different and take your career to a different direction or level. Or if you're unhappy and you want to make a switch, I think it's hard for some people to think that about that change and actually taking action. Did you have fear or doubt before you walked into it?
I did. I did. I had fear. Not gonna, that would be a lie to say that I didn't. Um, I had fear, but I knew that I had this conversation with my dad, and he's like, "What's the worst thing that could happen?" And I said, "I could lose everything. They foreclose on my house, and I'm living with my dog under a bridge." And he's like, "All right, well, how about I guarantee you that that's not going to happen?" And so he took the worst case scenario off the table for me. But I didn't even looking back on it. I didn't even need that. I thought I did, but I didn't. Um, and it was more just a function of, I think I was sort of also in a stagnant place. And I didn't realize just how stagnant it had become for me. And it was kind of what just reinvigorated me in general. And I'm so glad I took a chance on that.
So talk about the first couple months. What was that like, kind of opening up your own practice and switching sides? Talk a little bit about what that felt like.
I think the switching sides, the weirdest part of that was definitely appearing in court. And it's like, well, these words are coming out of my mouth. Like, Your Honor, my clients authorized me to tender a plea of guilty pursuant to the transcript. Like, I was like, what am I saying? I'm like, I'm supposed to be arraigning people. Like, this is weird. Um, but, or, talking to folks at the jail. And it's like, I knew exactly what words to say, but when they came out of my mouth, it was the strangest feeling.
Did
It
you
was the
did you walk
strangest
up to the
feeling.
wrong table? Like, did you ever walk up and go to the prosecution's table?
There were a couple times when I was like, "Oh, wrong table," because we have different courtrooms. The jury box is on different sides, so obviously, state defendant on different sides. But I would be like, "Oh no, this table over here. Okay, this is strange. All right, yeah. I'm used to sitting right next to the jury. This is weird."
Your experience prosecuting the cases, I think that is just it's so I don't know if it's unique. Unique is the word that I was going to use because I don't know how common is that to happen to go from prosecuting cases to defending them. Does that happen?
There, yeah, there are a lot of fantastic defense attorneys in our jurisdiction who were prosecutors at some point. Um, Not necessarily as long as I was, um, but definitely they cycled through the DA's office at some point for some period of time, because that is one of literally, if you want trial experience and that's what you're after, that is one of the best places to get it. Even better, I'd say, than the public defender's office, because the public defender, while they might have a lot of cases for trial, it's a fraction of what the DA in the courtroom who has that whole caseload. There were days in district court trying misdemeanors as a baby prosecutor. I'd have like 7 trials in a day. But these are just bench trials and they're fast. You might get 10 minutes to talk to your victim or witness outside in the hallway, and then it's just time to come tee it up. And it moves fast. And so that was always fun to just see how many we could try. And I would always keep track. I would never keep track of wins and losses. That's not what mattered to me. I would just put a tick mark in my notebook for every trial done, just to see how it would add up.
So do you know the total?
Yeah, bench trials over 300, um, and jury trials over 30. I do keep more of a detail on that because I'm a board certified specialist since 2014. I've been one, had to take basically a second bar exam in state criminal law testing area, and get peer references, reviews, and things like that from other lawyers and judges, and get vetted by the state bar for that designation. And we have to, every 5 years when we get recertified, we have to provide a list of our 8 or 10 most recent jury trials. So I do keep more of a detailed list of that. Yeah.
So you talked earlier about your primary role when you were a DA was kind of administering justice. And obviously you're an advocate for the state, but your primary role is administering justice. Is your hat is your primary role different now that you're representing people charged of crimes? Because you have to be an advocate first, whether they did something right or wrong, you have to be an advocate. Is that a different mindset?
It is a different mindset. It is a different mindset. So of course now, I fall under pretty much what all other lawyers besides prosecutors are, and my duty is to zealously represent my client. And I think the biggest mindset shift for me was I need to kind of like reel it back, because for so long I was used to gathering evidence and putting it together. And I had to stop myself in some cases from trying to literally put it together on behalf of my client, because that's the state's responsibility. Um, we don't have to prove anything. And that's the beauty of defense work. We don't have to prove a thing, because the state has the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt to prove that my client is guilty. And I can pretty much tear that apart every which way, but I don't have to affirmatively prove anything.
I don't know if I'm getting this from TV or movies, because that's where my knowledge comes from.
Oh, this question is going to be good, by the way. Whenever you start it like that, the question is going to be good. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I'm trying to remember the movie. There's such great movies out there about criminal law. You could probably write a few of those screenplays yourself, I'm sure. And I don't know if this is even appropriate, so I'm sure your editor will cut it out if it isn't. But do you tell your client, like, don't tell me if you did it. Like, I don't want to know. Do you have that kind of conversation? Because isn't there an obligation? Tell me. I don't know. I don't remember. Is there an obligation if your client does admit to you that they did it, that you have to do something differently?
No. So the only thing, and I kind of just take each client as they come. So I don't necessarily have one rule that I use with everybody, because every initial conversation that you have with somebody is different. The facts of it and the circumstances, but in every single case, are different. So I just generally start talking to folks and see where it goes. The only thing is, if I'm told something, and then at some point, it's kind of like that bar exam question. What do you do if your client says to you, or NPRE, or whichever test it was, right? Y'all probably remember when basically the fact pattern is your client tells you they're going to get on the stand at trial and lie. What do you do? And like I teach ethics about 4 times a year to new attorneys, and really it's like, well, it kind of depends on what phase you're in. If you're in the middle of trial, judge is not going to let you out of a case. And your client still has a constitutional right to testify. So, at that point in time, you let him take the stand. What would you like to tell the court? Let him give a narrative response. You're not asking questions, so you're not suborning perjury, nothing like that. And besides, you don't know what he's going to say until he actually gets on the stand and opens his mouth anyway. If it's something, leading up to trial, pre-trial, that can be completely different. If it gets heated, if there's an impasse, you might be able to withdraw at that point. It just sort of depends. But other than that, if some clients will, I'm 100% innocent, and then, really the tact I take is, all right, let's talk about what I want to focus on. Is I want to talk about this evidence the state has, and here's your copy. We're going to go through this, and I understand what you're telling me, but we need to go through this evidence that the state has against you and talk about what they can prove based on this evidence that they have. And that's going to have to inform our decision makings going forward. Of course, knowing that the final decision, whether it's plea, whether it's trial, that is entirely up to the client. My job is just to make sure that I explain the evidence to them well enough so that they know what their chances are if they decide to go to trial versus taking a plea. Because of course, the ideal best case scenario in every single case is different, right? It's not one size fits all. The state could have a tremendous case, in which case I have to say to my client, look, I think in this situation, the question is not, are you going to prison? The question is, how can I mitigate the amount of prison time that you get? Let me go talk to the DA, see if I can get maybe a reduction in a charge, maybe an attempt instead of a completed offense. Maybe I can get a mitigated range sentence for you. Then there's some cases where I might say to the DA, this felony is crazy. You only have the evidence for a misdemeanor because of X, Y, and Z. So maybe a misdemeanor is the best result in this case. And there's some cases where, oh, this is just trash and you need to dismiss this. So it's very narrowly tailored to the specific circumstances of each individual case. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. I want CLE credit for that.
Do you make a determination in your head when you take a case whether the person is innocent or guilty, or is that just not something that you need to do?
It's not something I need to do. And when I first take a case, I don't even have the ability to have the amount of information I need to kind of make that determination in my own head, if that makes sense. I could have a client I'm consulting with in the jail saying I'm completely innocent. And I'll say, you know what, I believe you. But I can't advise you right yet because we don't have discovery. And I'm not sure how it works in your jurisdictions, but in North Carolina, until a case is indicted into Superior Court by the grand jury, we can't get access to discovery. So we can only file that motion for discovery once a case is indicted. And so I explained that to them, it's going to be a little bit of a waiting game to see until we know what the evidence is that the state has against you, because clearly they have something or they wouldn't have charged you. We just don't know yet how strong that is. And we're not going to know that at the outset, which is very frustrating. And that I think is also kind of segues into probably the most frustrating part of the switch from one side to the other. I always knew that being a DA, I had a lot of power. I did not realize the absolute full amount of that power until I was on the other side. And I explained to clients too, I'm like, not that the deck is stacked, but kind of that the deck is stacked. Like the state literally has all the power. We pretty much, at the outset, have none. The state controls when the cases are calendared. We don't even have a right to discovery until the case gets indicted, which can be difficult at times, especially if you've got an incarcerated client. So a lot of times we might have a bond motion when the case is still pending in district court, not even necessarily because we think we might get the bond's going to be modified to something that the client can just easily make, but to get information about the case, right? Because the prosecutor is going to have to come to that bond motion, read off at least the preliminary police reports and say, this is the evidence that we're relying on to ask the court to continue to hold this defendant under this amount of bond. So that power shift, I never realized the magnitude of just how much power the state actually had until I wasn't the state anymore.
Do you see that as a problem in the justice system? I think I know what your answer is, but do you see that as like our criminal justice system is supposed to be fair and impartial? The administration of it isn't always that lack of power on the defense side, I imagine, also has to do some degree with money too. Like this is the perspective I have. If you're able to get, if you're a public can only afford a public defender, maybe your defense isn't going to be as good as someone that's, more expensive. Can you talk about just your overall impression now that you've been on both sides of what you think of the criminal justice system as a system?
Well, I think clients are completely aware of this because they will always say to me, well, how can I pay you? And I'm like, no, the state pays me. And they're like, but I want like a paid lawyer. And I'm like, I'm a private attorney. I'm not a public defender, even though I do have to brag on the public defenders in our jurisdiction in this county. They just celebrated their 50th year of existence. They are the oldest public defender's office in the state of North Carolina. They do an amazing job. And I'm so proud to work alongside them. And I always tell clients, actually, there's more people, I think, probably in the public defender's office I would want representing me than some private attorneys. But that being said, I think public defenders get a really bad rap that they don't deserve at all, because that's all they're doing all day, every day is criminal defense. They're such experts in their field, just like that's all that DAs are doing is criminal prosecution. So you have some really, really strong trial attorneys in the public defender's office, but it's that stereotype. And I think a lot of times defendants get stuck on that and they say, but I want to pay you. It's like, no, the state's going to pay me. That's fine. And I need you to know that I fight just as hard for the people who are appointed to my caseload as I do for somebody who's going to come to my office and lay down some stacks on my desk. That doesn't make a difference in terms of how hard I fight for you. And after you do that a few times for a few people, especially people who are incarcerated in the jail, word gets out that, hey, if this woman gets appointed to your case, you're going to be in good hands and she's going to fight really hard for you. I do see how so many people um, just feel like if they have no money, there's no option for them, or they're not going to get a fair shake, you know. And I think that monetary bond, it doesn't help at all either. Um, you know, it's tricky. It's just very, very difficult. But we see people in our state, you know, trending towards bond reform. We have there. I'm trying to think. Our senior judges did a revision of our bond guidelines back in January of 2020, um, and lowered a lot of them, which is good for nonviolent, low-level stuff. You know, I think for nonviolent crimes, low-level felonies, misdemeanors, there's no reason to have monetary bond. And I didn't realize the impact that it has on people when I was a prosecutor. I had never sat aside from the booking desk once when I had to do first appearances on a holiday when I was a baby prosecutor. I had never been in the jail before. Um, I think every new prosecutor needs to do a jail tour, needs to see what goes on there. Because once you're there and that door slams shut behind you, and you see how people are being housed, regardless of what they're accused of, it is life altering. It's humbling, it's life altering, and it's an experience that I wish hadn't taken me 15 years to have.
Was that a scary experience to do that? That first time that you walked into and walked around and did a jail tour? Were you nervous?
So I guess it wasn't even really the first, it wasn't even like a tour. It was me going to see a client. And
Yeah.
luckily, a friend of mine who's also a defense attorney, she came with me to show me where to go, to get my badge checked in at the front and then to get me up to the floor. So that she helped me navigate that, which, you know, I try to pay that forward to other attorneys who are newer when I can, just because that helped me so much. But it was a very sobering experience being in that jail for the first time. And every time I go, it's a sobering experience and it's humbling. Um, and you just realize there is a huge population that is forgotten about or discarded, and that people just don't care about. And it's absolutely appalling. And it's heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking. And this is coming from somebody who was really on a career prosecution track. But it has nothing to do at the end of the day. I don't think it has anything to do with what side you represent. I think it has to do with humanity.
Do you ever take your cases personally? And by that I mean, do you ever make a judgment call in your head that this person's innocent, and then you see them go into jail just because they got a rough deal, and then there's that guilt, or even the opposite, where you've made a judgment call that they're guilty and they're set free? Like, and I'm not. Maybe you don't. I'm just curious to know that if you ever get that close to your clients and your cases.
Um, I try not to take things personally, and I try to remove as much emotion as possible, because if I allow myself to get emotional about something, I'm going to miss things. I'm going to miss things. And I'll tell you what, it's actually a conversation that I have with, especially the mothers of some of my clients. I had an experience early on, with a mother who cared deeply about her son, and I cared deeply about that case too. And I think my lack of emotion was a little bit off-putting to her. And I had to really, you know, I just had to say to her, I know we're both women. You're the mom. I'm the lawyer. Your job is to be emotional. Your job is to ask those hard questions. And your job is to mom as hard as you can for your son. My job is to keep emotion out of it, because if I let emotion get into it, I miss things. And I can't afford to miss things, because your child is charged with such serious crimes that he could go to prison for literally the rest of his life. And that that had a profound, when I articulated that, it had a profound impact on the relationship that she and I had created. And it was in a positive way. And so it's something that I will say to a lot of moms now of clients from the outset. You know, I want you to understand that this is obviously going to be a very emotional thing for you. And if you don't see me respond in the same way, that's there's a reason why. And honestly, I think that's a conversation. I don't think men have to have that conversation. I don't think that's something that would come up for a male criminal defense attorney. I don't know, because I've never been one. But but I can't really see that. Maybe I should poll my colleagues, but I don't think it's a thing. Um, so that's been something that's very interesting to me. But I don't necessarily make a judgment from the get-go, because again, we rarely have all the information at the get-go. Um, and I try to keep an open mind about as much as possible. Because again, you never know what surprises are waiting in discovery. I've had situations where someone says, you know, I'm completely innocent of everything. And while the discovery kind of bears that out, it might bear that out for every charge except one. So it's just, it's too, I can't really paint with a broad brush because every case is so incredibly different. The fact sets are different. And the players are different. Everybody's different.
Kristen, for any law students that are listening that want to get into the DA's office, how did you find these internships? How did that happen?
For me, I was pretty lucky. The elected district attorney in that county at that time was a family friend and reached out to him, and he was very welcoming. Let me come and start interning for him and for his staff. But you know, reach out. Law students should just reach out. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone, make a call, send an email. You know, public service jobs, they always want people who are willing to work for free. They want people who work hard, who are willing to work for free and aren't afraid to work for free. Because you know, spoiler alert, you're not gonna, this is not like a summer associate type monetary payback. But you will get a lot from it if that's what you want to do. Because even though there were no openings in that office when I graduated, he was also, the elected was able to provide me a recommendation to the elected DA 2 counties over, where I ended up getting hired. And I know his seal of approval meant a lot to the elected DA who hired me.
That's so fantastic. Is there anybody in the DA's office, a particular position that someone should be reaching out to? And the reason that I ask that, I know at least in private practice, civil practice, it's not necessarily the lawyer. Sometimes it's the assistant, you know, the legal assistant that can help you get that introduction. What's the hierarchy of the DA world? Who's the most accessible?
It depends on the district and it depends on the size of the district. You know, here in North Carolina, some of our districts are small with very few assistant DAs. Some are much larger urban areas. And so I'd say, you know, if you know somebody there, reach out. If not, just cold call, find out, you know, who's in charge of hiring, who should I send a resume to the attention of, and just, you know, I'm sure you'll get a response if you just ask those questions just on a cold call.
Well, how's business going these days? You're now, what, 15, 16 months into running your own
Yeah.
business. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. I've been very lucky that the majority of my practice is Superior Court based. So like a lot of the high level felony defense, because that court was able to keep going through the pandemic, because even though most of our courts shut down, obviously courts that were necessary to due process, like, you know, felony bond motions, pleas to get people out of jail, things like that, those things were all still happening during this whole last 10 months. So I'm very thankful for that, that I'm not, you know, primarily like traffic court based, where traffic court shut down for a very long period of time. So I'm thankful. I'm definitely thankful. But I think, you know, just hearing chatter amongst my colleagues, I think it's kind of a rough time right now for people. Um, so I'm just glad that things have remained steady. Um, but it has been frustrating, even with the newest shutdown. You know, if I'm not closing cases, I'm not submitting fee applications on my appointed cases, and things slow down a little bit. But I think it's all part of what I've learned is the ebb and flow of private practice. And that's another fear that I didn't know I should even have, right? It's a new fear that I learned all about, that things do kind of even out, but they will go up, they will go down. It's just a cycle. I joke that the scariest thing about Halloween 2019 is that was the first last day of the month in 15 years that I had not gotten a direct deposit in my checking account from my job. Um, and so that's definitely taken some getting used to. And there, you know, maybe months where the bills get paid a week later than they would normally. But I think it's just part of learning to adjust and let go a little bit. It's helped me to dial it down I mean, I am wound pretty tightly generally, but it's helped me to dial it back a little bit, take a deep breath. And there are a couple friends that I have in the practice who've been doing this longer than I have, who have been very helpful to me in just saying, just deep breath. It's going to even out. You just have to trust. Um, and it has borne out that way. So,
I've had this, I had the same mental exercise when I became a managing partner 7 years ago, stepping into a role that I had no idea what I was doing. Like, it's different to run your own cases in practice law, but then when you start to manage other people and you manage business itself, it changes you. And I had that fear. I would see things ebb and flow. And when it was on the downside, I was like, oh, and then, you know, that would happen, that it would just happen. And then the up parts, you were like, oh, life is great. And then I learned to not react to either, and
mhm.
just recognize that as part of career, as part of life. There's, your life is a roller coaster in and of itself. If you don't learn to weather the ups and downs in sort of an even way, you are going to be on for a hell of a ride. So I feel that. Um, let me just shift, because I know we have to wrap up soon. Let me just shift to some more lighthearted discussions. One, have you seen Making a Murderer on Netflix? Have you seen that documentary?
I saw part of it. I saw part of it.
Is he guilty? Can you tell me? Can you know?
I didn't see the whole thing. The one thing that stood out to me from, I think, the episodes that I saw was it the nephew that got completely railroaded, and his defense attorney basically stood on the steps of the courthouse and just dimed him out. I remember thinking, who does that? And then I saw that clip. Y'all probably saw that I'd posted it on my LinkedIn. I saw that clip of the defense attorneys for the guy that got charged for stealing the lectern at the Capitol insurrection. And that guy's standing outside the jail with his client talking about, yeah, I've got, pictures of my client in the federal building or the Capitol. And, I'm not a magician. So clearly that's a problem. And I'm scratching my head like, wow, it's
I
not
did not
not
see
what
that.
I
So
no,
I'll have to check
not
that
what I
out.
was trained to do.
So I also saw that in January of this year, you got admitted to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. And I just want to applaud that,
Thank you.
because I don't know if many people know this, that not many attorneys are barred at this, are admitted to practice at the Supreme Court of the United States. Like, that's an honor in and of itself. What, can you talk briefly what that experience was like for you?
So it was a little bit different because of COVID. So I didn't go to Washington.
Oh, you didn't
I
walk up
got
the steps?
yeah, so I got admitted on motion, and it because it had been on my list of things to do, right? And I'm trying to get things checked off my list of things to do. And the pandemic's been helpful with that. And so I thought, well, I have some extra time. I'll just do this application, get the certificate of good standing from, the Supreme Court of North Carolina, get that sent in. My old chief signed as my sponsor to make my motion for me. And I had another attorney friend sign on as my second sponsoring attorney. So what I'm going to do is, when COVID is over, I'm going to plan a trip to DC with some friends and do all my favorite things there. Like nighttime cocktails on the roof of the Hay Adams Hotel across from the White House, and see friends for meals and just have good times, and go see oral arguments at the Supreme Court and sit in the reserved section and kind of just live it up. So it's something I'm looking forward to after COVID, but I'm glad I went ahead and got admitted now, because they weren't doing anything in person. And I wanted, honestly, if I'll just say this, if RBG was still on the bench, I would probably have waited to go in person and do it. But she's not. So I decided, why not just do this now, get admitted, and then I'll go up to Washington once this is all over.
I love that. My last question for you, or one of my last questions, I should say, is you are on a quest to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Can you talk? And I'm like in awe of that. And you're doing it in October, right? Is that right? October of 2021?
September.
Okay. So how did that happen, and how are you feeling about that now?
Okay, so thanks for asking about that. I'm so excited. So we rewind to 2013, and in 2013, my mom was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which is an incurable cancer of the blood. And so she has been receiving treatments since 2013, and she has been on so many novel medications for that cancer since then. Until around the year 2000, the standard of care for multiple myeloma had not changed at all in like basically the preceding 40 years. And it was when this woman, Kathy Giusti, was diagnosed back in 1998. She enlisted alumni connections from Harvard Business School to basically help her fight her cancer the way a business would. And she started what is known as the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. And in those years since, they have raised so much money to put directly into the pipeline for research. Their research and development has led to the advent of 13 oncology drugs being approved in the last 20 years, which is usually the time it takes one to be approved by the FDA. My mom's been on about 7 of those medications. So really the R&D that the MMRF has done is really the reason why my mom is still alive. And I remember back in 2014, I was going to participate in their Empire State Building run up that January. I had raised all the money I needed to, was ready to go. And then my mom had her stem cell transplant. And so I had to stay in North Carolina for that. So I wasn't able to do that. Then they started, in addition to people raising money for them, running marathons and things like that, they also started a program called Moving Mountains for Multiple Myeloma, where every year they have teams of patients, caregivers, doctors, nurses, researchers who travel to far off corners of the earth, do these expeditions, and raise a whole hell of a lot of money in the process. And so I was selected to be on their Mount Kilimanjaro expedition last year. We were originally supposed to go in September of 2020. It got pushed to March of 2021, and now it got pushed to September. But I'm just looking forward to be able to do this, everyone being safe and healthy. Our team is going to spend about 2 weeks in Tanzania. We have an 8-day trek up the mountain, 6.5 days up, 1.5 days down. Everyone on our team has committed to raising $10,000. And so our whole team as a whole is looking to raise about $250,000 or more to go directly towards research to find a cure for multiple myeloma. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm just looking forward to it.
Where are you on your fundraising goal, if I can ask?
I am about 22% of the way there right now.
If people want to donate, where can they find that link?
They can find that on my LinkedIn or on my Instagram. And maybe when we run the teaser for this podcast, we can include a link to that.
Absolutely. We'll drop that link. So I love that. Will you come back on after you do it and talk about the experience?
I would honestly love to. That would be fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it. I don't camp much. So it's going to be interesting. I am an endurance athlete from a former life. I've run 3 full marathons. So I'm hoping some of that muscle memory kicks in, and I've been doing a lot of Tabata training on the Peloton to try to maximize my oxygen capacity. But honestly, the thing that scares me more than mountain sickness is 8 days with like just dry shampoo. But we'll see how that goes, and like no showers. But we'll see how that goes. But I'm so excited to see the view from the top and to kind of check this item off the bucket list at the same time that I'm raising money for this cause that is so near and dear to my heart.
I think it's amazing. I can't wait. I can't wait for you to come back and talk about it because wow, what an experience. Again, not something many people do in their lifetime. So major kudos to you for that undertaking. All right, so we got to wrap up. It was so awesome to talk to you. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
So I am on all social all the time. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram. My handle is CSH Law PLLC. On Facebook as well. And I look forward to connecting with whoever wants to connect.
Well, Kristen, thank you so much. I love picking your brain. I think what you do in the criminal justice side of things is so easily translatable to what I do in the litigation, civil litigation side. And I love the mindset and just the embrace of change and how clear you are on what your role is and what you do. So thank you so much for coming. So thanks everybody for joining us, and make sure you tune in next time on The Defense Never Rests. We will see you then.